Good morning, everyone. Today, I would like to invite Dr. Abhishek Agrawal, DM Cardio, to give his opinion about a case of acute chest pain, which is a very common presentation in our OPDs, and I hope it will be very helpful for all of us to grab this knowledge. Thank you. Abhishek, please.
Good morning, my respected seniors. I am Dr. Abhishek Agrawal and I will be discussing the approach to a case of acute chest pain today. So, if we take the incidence, approximately 5% of all the emergency department visits are because of acute chest pain, which accounts to around 5 million visits per year according to the USA data. Now, the chest pain can be either because of a visceral or a parietal pain. The visceral fibers enter the spinal cord at several levels, which lead to a very poorly localized and poorly characterized pain like discomfort, heaviness or dull aching. The heart, blood vessels, esophagus and visceral pleura are innervated by visceral fibers. Because the dorsal fibers can overlap 3 levels above or below the corresponding spinal segment, the diseases of thoracic origin can produce pain from anywhere between the jaw to the epigastrium. In contrast, the parietal pain is described as a sharp, localized to a specific dermatome, superficial to the site of this painful stimulus. The dermis and the parietal pleura are innervated by the parietal fibers. If we take in account the top 10 causes of chest pain in emergency department, I would like you to focus on only the top 2 causes. If we divide them according to the age, non-specific chest pain is the most common cause of acute chest pain in all the age groups. It is not that acute MI is the most common cause in the elderlies, but if we go to the second most common cause, then post 45 years of age, the second most common cause is coronary atherosclerosis. However, in young population, the second most common cause is a painful respiration because of a parietal chest pain. So, what are the differential diagnoses of a non-cardiac chest pain? In respiratory cases, it can be pulmonary embolism, a pneumothorax or hemothorax, pneumomediastinum, pneumonia, bronchitis, pleural irritation or malignancy. In gastrointestinal tract, it can be cholecystitis, pancreatitis, hiatal hernia, GERD, gastritis or esophagitis, peptic ulcer disease, esophageal spasm, dyspepsia. In chest wall, it can be a localized costochondritis, any trauma or inflammation, herpes zoster, cervical radiculopathy, breast disease, rib fracture or any musculoskeletal spasm. Psychologically, there can be a panic disorder, anxiety, clinical depression, somatization disorder or hypochondriasis. Now, the thing is how to differentiate what is the cause of the chest pain. So, if we divide the causes based on the location, the most important location is retrosternal today. So, the most common cause for retrosternal chest pain will be a myocardial ischemic pain, a pericardial pain, esophageal pain, aortic dissection, any mediastinal disease or pulmonary embolization. If the pain is in the shoulder joint or in the shoulder area, it can be because of myocardial ischemic pain, pain of pericarditis. Now, the pain of pericarditis is classically just behind the trapezius, at the base of the trapezius, which increases on supine position and decreases in leaning forward position. It can be a subdiaphragmatic abscess radiating to the shoulder, a diaphragmatic pleurisy, any cervical spine disease, acute musculoskeletal pain or thoracic outlet syndrome. Pain radiating to the arms. So, the first DD is obviously myocardial ischemia, then the cervical pain can also be referred to the arms and a thoracic outlet syndrome. Occasionally, the pain of acute MI radiates only to the right arm and not to the left arm. So, if a person is complaining of a right arm pain also, we should consider a differential of acute MI. Epigastric pain, again myocardial ischemic pain in elderlies or diabetics and even in women, it can cause epigastric pain, especially the inferior wall MI. Any pericardial pain, esophageal pain, duodenal or gastric pain, pancreatic gallbladder pain, distension of the liver, diaphragmatic pleurisy or pneumonia. So, out of all these causes, what are the most life threatening causes of acute chest pain? So, there are 6 causes: acute coronary syndrome, pulmonary embolism, tension pneumothorax, aortic dissection, esophageal rupture and pericarditis with tamponade. So, how to differentiate based on the nature of the chest pain? Anginal symptoms are perceived as a retrosternal chest discomfort. It can be a pain, discomfort, heaviness, tightness, any pressure a belt type of feeling, constriction, squeezing pain. Any sharp chest pain which increases with inspiration and lying down is unlikely related to be ischemic heart disease. These symptoms are usually seen with pericarditis. Based on the onset, anginal symptoms gradually build up in intensity over a few minutes, whereas a sudden onset of ripping chest pain radiating to the upper or lower back is unlikely to be anginal and is suspicious to be an acute aortic syndrome, that is acute aortic dissection. A fleeting chest pain of few seconds duration is unlikely to be ischemic heart disease. Also, we should always ask the patient to point out by his fingers where he is having a chest pain. If the patient is pointing like fingers, I am having chest pain like this, then it is unlikely to be cardiac in origin. So, again the localization, the pain which is localized to a very limited area and radiating below the umbilicus or hip or above the jaw is unlikely to be myocardial ischemia. Based on the severity, again any ripping chest pain, often described as the worst chest pain of my life, occurring in a hypertensive patient, sudden in onset, a known case of bicuspid aortic valve disease or aortic dilatation, we should keep aortic dissection in mind. Precipitating factors like exercise or emotional stress can trigger angina. Occurrence at rest or with minimal exertion can also be angina, especially ACS. Any positional chest pain is usually non-ischemic, musculoskeletal. Now, relieving factors, nitroglycerin is a very specific test to diagnose or suspect an anginal chest pain, but it is not 100% sure because pain of esophageal spasm is also relieved by nitroglycerin. Associated symptoms like dyspnea, palpitation, diaphoresis, lightheadedness, pre-syncope or syncope, upper abdominal pain or heartburn unrelated to meals, nausea and vomiting can be seen in myocardial ischemia. But again the elderlies, diabetics and females, these three subset can have a left or right sided atypical chest pain, a stabbing, sharp pain, discomfort in the throat or abdomen. So, these atypical symptoms can be present in these subgroups. So, we will discuss acute myocardial infarction in detail today. Again, it is very important to differentiate the ischemic and non-ischemic chest pain. So, location of ischemic chest pain will be central and diffuse, often described to as Levine sign, in which the patient keeps a fist and keeps it on the retrosternum. A non-cardiac chest pain will be peripheral and localized, radiating to the jaw, neck, shoulder and arm. Occasionally black back can be seen in cardiac chest pain. In non-cardiac chest pain, there won't be any radiation. The character will be tight, squeezing and choking for myocardial chest pain. It will be sharp, stabbing type of pain in non-cardiac, precipitated by exertion and emotion in cardiac chest pain, whereas a spontaneous chest pain which is provoked by posture, respiration or palpitation is unlikely to be cardiac. If it is relieved by nitrates, likely to be cardiac, not relieved by nitrates, unlikely to be cardiac. Associated breathlessness, palpitations, diaphoresis is likely to be cardiac in origin. So, again the same things, a sudden substernal crushing chest pain with radiation to the left arm or jaw which worsens with exercise is associated with breathlessness, diaphoresis, nausea and vomiting. In a patient having high risk factors like high BP, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, any family history of coronary artery disease, plus minus a past history of coronary artery disease. So, we should suspect acute myocardial ischemia. Now, it is divided into three types: unstable angina, NST-MI and ST elevation MI. This NST-MI is recently labeled as NST-ACS, that is non-ST elevation acute coronary syndrome, which combines both unstable angina as well as NST-MI. So, now we have got two categorizations, ST elevation MI and NST-ACS. However, keeping in view the old literature, the unstable angina means a non-occlusive thrombus with no clear-cut features on ECG and normal cardiac enzymes. Thus, if we clinically suspect a patient of acute coronary syndrome, but the ECG is normal, the cardiac enzymes are normal, we label him as unstable angina in a case of high suspicion of ACS. In NST-MI, there is a non-occlusive thrombus, so there will be ST depression plus minus T wave inversions on the ECG and elevated cardiac enzymes. In ST elevation MI, there is a complete thrombus occlusion. The ST elevation is seen in the ECG or a new onset left bundle branch block. The cardiac enzymes are elevated. Patient is having much more symptoms and there is a high risk of cardiac arrest. So, what to do? We get a patient of chest pain, we have already discussed the history, we have already discussed the examination. Now we get an ECG. So getting an ECG in a chest pain is a no-brainer, we have to do in all the patients. After that, if the patient is having ST elevation MI, we will treat accordingly. If the patient is having diffuse ST elevation, which is consistent with pericarditis, then we have to suspect pericarditis. So if there is ST depression, then we will follow NST ACS guidelines. If the ECG is non-diagnostic, then we should not let the patient leave the emergency or our clinic. We should keep the patient under observation. We should repeat the ECG at serial intervals if we are having a high degree of suspicion. We should repeat the troponins. The minimum time duration that troponins take to become positive is 6 hours, although the recent most high sensitive tropis which are available nowadays can detect as early as 2 to 3 hours. But again, it is advisable to repeat the troponins at an interval of 6 hours. If the 2 troponins are negative, then we can send the patient home. If there is any new arrhythmia, then we should treat accordingly. So how to diagnose myocardial infarction? So the EAC advises detection in the change of troponin levels on 2 successive episodes with associated either myocardial ischemia, ECG changes, pathological Q waves, new pathological Q waves, echo showing regional wall motion abnormality, or identification of a coronary thrombus on angiography or autopsy. Now, I would like to discuss the recent 2017 ESC guidelines for the time, duration and management in case of acute MI with ST elevation MI. So, as soon as a patient develops chest pain, the time from the contact of the emergency person till the ECG should be less than 10 minutes. So, in Western world, they have got ECG in their ambulance only, which is not practical in our scenario. But as soon as we get an ECG by an RMO or even a non-medical person, he should WhatsApp up. We have got WhatsApp nowadays. He should WhatsApp up the ECG. If the ECG is showing ST elevation, it should be diagnosed within 10 minutes. It should not be delayed. And then we have to take a decision whether we can do a PCI or not within the next 2 hours. We are talking about the first 12 hours of the chest pain. If we decide that time to PCI is less than 2 hours, then we have to shift the patient to a PCI center and a primary angioplasty has to be done. We cannot thrombolize such a patient. However, if the expected time to PCI is more than 2 hours, then we should do a thrombolysis, and again the expected time of thrombolysis is less than 10 minutes. That is, we should expedite the process as early as possible. Once the patient comes to a PCI, again it comes to the cardiologist that the reperfusion, that is the wire crossing, should be done in less than 90 minutes. So we need to have a very trained cardiologist, we have got trained technicians, and we need a very fast emergency services to enable such a fast reperfusion time. So initially we used to state there was a door to balloon time. Now it has been changed and there is a wire crossing time which is less than 90 minutes in case of primary PCI. If the patient directly goes to a PCI enabled center, then the time to reperfusion should be less than 60 minutes. Now again the further classification, once we have done the PCI, it is good enough. In case we fibrinolyze the patient because of some other issues, then what should be the strategy? Should we manage the patient conservatively or should we go for something else? So there are some reperfusion criterias, like if the change in the ST segment elevation, it should fall by more than 50% after fibrinolysis. We should get an ECG after 60 to 90 minutes of fibrinolysis. If the change in the ST segment elevation is more than 50%, that is, it decreases by more than 50%, it was a successful fibrinolysis. Then we can manage the patient conservatively. However, if it does not fall, or if the patient develops recurrent chest pain, if he develops shock, if he develops arrhythmias, in that case, we should immediately shift the patient to a PCI center and get a PCI done. So, I have been talking about PCI, primary angioplasty, but what is the time duration? So, the time duration is divided into 12 hours and 48 hours. Till 12 hours, both primary PCI and fibrinolysis, both are very good, both are class 1A indication. However, a primary PCI is better than fibrinolysis, and fibrinolysis should be done only if PCI cannot be performed within the 120 minutes of the diagnosis. After 12 hours, from the 12 to 48 hours, again if the patient is having any symptom, hemodynamic stability in the form of shock or any arrhythmias, we should again go for a primary PCI. And even in asymptomatic patients, primary PCI can be considered till 48 hours if the patient is asymptomatic, because it has got mortality benefit, we are able to salvage the myocardium. After 48 hours, a routine PCI is not indicated, but again I would like to emphasize, even after 48 hours, if the patient is asymptomatic, we should get an angio done before the hospital discharge. These are what the guidelines recommend. So I would like to discuss a case. 1 week back, I had an 87 years old gentleman. He was just 43 kgs in weight, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive. He had chest pain for 6 hours of duration. Patient was going into shock. His systolic BP was 80 mmHg, pulse rate was 56 per minute. The ECG showed inferior wall MI, echo showed RCA territory hypokinesia, LVEF was 40%. Now again, what should have been the ideal strategy in this case? Either fibrinolysis or PCI. According to the guidelines, PCI is better. Again, there were some contraindications, relative contraindications for fibrinolysis, that patient was underweight. 43 kg is too low of a weight to give, to thrombolize the patient. So I took up the patient for primary PCI. So this is the angiography in which the RCA is shown 100% blocked in the mid segment. You can see that the RCA is 100% blocked in the mid segment. This is the 100% blockage of the RCA. So I crossed the wire with the help of a balloon. And this is the final result in which the RCA is completely open. We can compare the before and after images. Here it is 100% blocked, here it is 100% open. Yes, sir. Here we can see RCA is 100% blocked here. This is the acute marginal branch. The RCA is 100% blocked here. Here it is open. So patient had immediate relief in the chest pain. His BP shot up to 100 mmHg, and patient is doing excellent now. So this reperfusion therapy, in the absence of ST segment elevation, a primary PCI strategy is indicated in patients with suspected ongoing ischemic symptoms suggestive of MI and at least one of the following criteria. So now we are talking about non-ST elevation MI. So when we have to go for a PCI in the case of non-ST elevation MI. So again, there are some criteria, but a general rule is if the patient is in shock, if patient is having recurrent chest pain, if patient is having any life-threatening arrhythmias, if patient had any episode of cardiac arrest, any mechanical complications, acute heart failure, or dynamic STT changes are reoccurring, then we should go for a primary PCI even in case of non-ST elevation MI. Now the dosing, we have to load the patient with aspirin, everyone knows, but again I would like to emphasize, I have seen doctors loading the patient with Clavix AS combination or some other combination. These combinations are enteric coated aspirin tablets. We need an immediate absorption of aspirin inside the body. So what I personally do is I give a Disprin tablet. It contains 325 milligram of aspirin and it has to be chewed. So we should not give this combination of aspirin, Clavix CS or something like that to the patients. 4 tablets people give here. Because these tablets are enteric coated, there is not a rapid mucosal absorption, so it won't benefit the patient as much as a Disprin tablet. So we should load the patient with a Disprin. Along with that, clopidogrel 300 mg, 600 mg if we are planning a PCI. The loading dose of prasugrel is 60 mg followed by 10 mg of maintenance dose, but there are some contraindications: low body weight of less than 60 kg, age of more than 75 years, or any previous history of stroke. We should avoid prasugrel. Ticagrelor, the loading dose is 180 mg followed by 90 mg twice a day. One extra point out of this seminar I want to emphasize: what is the warranty period? Like any electrical appliance, we give a warranty period, we cardiologists give to the patients. If someone has a normal angiogram, either a CT coronary angio or any invasive angio which showed absolutely normal coronaries without any plaque, we give a warranty of 2 years that for the next 2 years you won't die of a heart attack. That is for sure. Even a small plaque if is present, then we cannot guarantee the patient, because the most common cause of myocardial infarction is plaque rupture or erosion. In case of stress testing, that is TMT, if TMT is normal, then we give a warranty period of 1 year. So if someone comes to you with a high risk factors of diabetes, hypertension, familial history of coronary artery disease, you get a TMT done, it is normal, then it should be repeated each and every year, just to make sure that next year patient is not having a significant blockage at the moment. Now coming to pulmonary embolism. Pulmonary embolism and deep vein thrombosis are a part of a larger entity, venous thromboembolism. So venous thromboembolism is equal to DVT plus pulmonary embolism, and it is known as the great masquerader because it is very difficult to diagnose. Pathophysiology, it is because of thrombosis of a pulmonary artery, thrombosis or embolism. More than 90% of cases arise from DVT, and clot from a DVT travels through the venous system, lodges in the pulmonary vasculature, creating a ventilation perfusion mismatch. Clinical features, I would like to emphasize the most common symptom is dyspnea and the most common sign is tachycardia. Otherwise, patient may have a chest pain, anxiety, cough. In the signs, patient will have tachypnea, tachycardia, even a low-grade fever can be present, left parasternal heave because of RV dysfunction, TR murmur can be heard, hemoptysis, and then signs of DVT like leg edema, erythema and tenderness. So again, this Sunday I had a patient, he had a fracture of the tibia for the past 1.5 months, patient was immobilized, he had acute onset chest pain and breathlessness for 1 day. So I went, he came to an orthopedician, I went there, the patient had tachycardia, ECG showed sinus tachycardia, the chest was absolutely clear, cardiac auscultation was absolutely normal. So they were thinking on the lines of pneumonia and ARDS or COVID point of view. So I said it is most likely to be a case of pulmonary embolism because there were risk factors of immobilization as well as the dyspnea was acute in onset. I did an echo. Echo showed the classical McGonagall sign in which there was RV apex hypokinesia along with, RV basal hypokinesia along with apex hypercontractility. I did a CTPE urgently. There was huge thrombus in both left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery. So CT pulmonary angio. CT pulmonary angio. So this is the left pulmonary artery. We can see the thrombus here, and this is the right pulmonary artery. The thrombus is here. These are the different views that I've taken.
In both arteries there are thrombus.
In both arteries. So this is the left pulmonary artery. This was a thrombus. In the right pulmonary artery, here is the thrombus. I shifted the patient जहाँ पे था सर. नहीं तुरंत सर, within 30 minutes I did everything.
The patient was young.
Patient was 40 years. Patient was going into shock. His saturation was 90%. So he was an ideal candidate for thrombolysis. So I thrombolized the patient, and immediately within 6 hours his saturation improved. He was off oxygen. His RV has also improved now, just in 2 days. Now he will be on a anticoagulant for 6 months because there was a risk factor involved. If there was no risk factor, then we have to anticoagulate for the whole of his life. So these are some chest X-ray findings.
What happened about the fracture?
Sir?
What happened about the fracture?
No, he's on conservative management by an orthopedician for that.
They didn't operate.
They didn't operate for that. And he was also walking on walker. He was not completely immobilized, but again that limb in which he must have got the DVT, that limb was immobilized. Even on walker, you put all of your strength on this limb. This will be immobilized, sort of immobilized.
Another question: were they using low molecular weight heparin prior to this incidence?
No.
No.
Because in orthopedic cases, the treatment lasts for 2 to 3 months in the complete recovery. So no one gives low molecular weight heparin for such a long time. No, sir.
Low molecular.
No, sir. They don't give.
Before the surgery, the day surgery they stop, and the next day again start.
No, sir. The patient had a fracture 1.5 months back.
He had
Fracture 1.5 months back, and he was on conservative treatment. He had a slab in place. Sir, ideal treatment is LT place, 100 LT place, but it costs 1 lakh rupees. So the other option is streptokinase, 2.5 lakh unit over 30 minutes, followed by 1 lakh units per hour for 12 to 24 hours based on your clinical decision. And heparin has to be stopped before giving this streptokinase, and it has to be initiated 6 hours after the stopping the streptokinase. Sir, it can be given, but I have not used. Yes, urokinase can also be given, but I have not used.
For streptokinase therapy?
So 1600 is for 1 vial. So a total of 2 vials are used, around 3200.
वहाँ 1 लाख और यहाँ 3200.
Yes.
बहुत फर्क है, बहुत अच्छा है.
Some people give tenecteplase also, but it has not come into the guidelines. Tenecteplase and retiplase, they cost somewhere around 40,000, but they have not come into the guidelines right now.
Streptokinase very bad as compared to the drug which costs 1 lakh rupees.
So any drug which has become cheap na, it becomes absolute. Digoxin आपके टाइम पे सर एंड आज के टाइम streptokinase gives good result in embolism. And again for MI the time of fibrinolysis is just 12 hours. For CVA it is 4.5 hours. But for pulmonary embolism it is 14 days. So we can thrombolize a patient up to 14 days after the onset of symptoms.
3200 में काम हो जाएगा.
200 से चल रहा है.
So these are some chest X-ray findings: Hampton hump, Westermarck sign, and Palas sign.
The same patient.
No, this is from internet. The ECG findings, we can have tachycardia, right axis deviation, incomplete right bundle branch block, T-wave inversions in the inferior and anteroseptal leads, and classical S1Q3 T3, but it is present in only 37% of cases of pulmonary embolism. This is an echo picture just showing RV dilatation in a case of embolism. So there is a Wells criteria to determine the likelihood of pulmonary embolism. Someone comes with acute onset dyspnea, we cannot go for CT pulmonary angio in each and every of the case. So there are some findings like deep vein thrombosis, any alternative diagnosis than pulmonary embolism, presence of tachycardia, history of prior pulmonary embolism or DVT, hemoptysis, any immobilization for more than 3 days or surgery within the past 4 weeks, cancer. So we give points according to all these criteria, and if the score is more than 4, there is a high probability of embolism. If it is less than or equal to 4, there is a low probability. So based on this, if there is a low probability and we are suspecting embolism, patient is having dyspnea, we will get a D dimer. If D dimer is normal, nothing to do. If D dimer is high or patient is having a high clinical probability, we will directly go for chest CT pulmonary angiography. And
डॉक्टर साहब एक चीज़ बताइए, पर
जी सर।
बड़ी जो सीरियस कंडीशन हो गया, इमरजेंसी हो गई,
डेफिनेटली सर।
तो हम लोग डी डाइमर तक वेट करेंगे तो मरीज का क्या होगा?
सर वेस्टर्न डाटा है जहाँ पे 30 मिनट्स में मिल जाता है, एक्चुअली डी डाइमर लैब में टेक्स 15 मिनट्स फॉर द मशीन टू कंपाइल।
गोरखपुर में तो संभव नहीं है 15 मिनट।
सर होगा सर, मतलब 1 घंटे में हो जाएगा सर, 1 घंटे। एंड सर लो प्रोबेबिलिटी में हम लोग डी डाइमर करवा रहे हैं। लो प्रोबेबिलिटी का मतलब है पेशेंट को सेचुरेशन फॉल नहीं करेगा। अगर सेचुरेशन फॉल करता है या हार्ट रेट इज मोर देन 110, पेशेंट डायरेक्टली इंटरमीडिएट रिस्क में आ जाता है, तो उसके अकॉर्डिंगली हम लोग डिसीजन लेते हैं।
मान लो रात को किसी को प्रॉब्लम हुई तो उस समय पैथोलॉजी वाले
नहीं सर।
तो मिल जाएगा। हम समझते हैं कि इनको सबसे अर्जेंट एंड फर्स्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट है डायग्नोस करने के लिए।
सर इको से सस्पेक्ट कर सकते हैं, बट एलोन इको पे कभी भी हम लोग थ्रोम्बोलाइज नहीं कर सकते हैं बिफोर CTPA।
तो आपको सीटी चाहिए?
चाहिए सर। हाँ वही आ रहे हैं सर। तो इफ we have confirmed pulmonary embolism or there is a intermediate to high probability, we will start heparin and we will stratify the patient to low risk, intermediate or high risk, that is low, submassive and massive. Massive pulmonary embolism if the patient is in shock, clear cut. Intermediate if the BP is normal, but either we are having echo findings of pulmonary embolism or we are having TROP-I or NT-proBNP positive, any one of these two, then it is an intermediate risk. If none of these are present, then it is a low risk. So for low risk, just heparin, IV heparin will suffice. Later on we can shift to newer oral anticoagulants. If it is high risk, we have to thrombolyze. If it is an intermediate risk, then we can thrombolyze, it is up to the clinician, or we can wait. If the patient deteriorates, then we thrombolyze, otherwise we keep him on heparin only. There has been a recent update to this intermediate risk stratification. If the patient is having cancer, his age is more than 80, if he is having tachycardia of more than 110 or arterial saturation of less than 90, then patient directly comes into intermediate risk. So, there is a PESI score, pulmonary embolism severity index score, which accounts for these 4 findings. Coming to aortic dissection, there is an intimal tear of the aorta which leads to the dissection of the layers of the aorta, creating a false lumen. For the diagnosis, we have already discussed, we need a tearing chest pain radiating to the back. Patient may have a hypertension, connective tissue disease. On examination, patient will have a high BP. Pulse difference is very essential. For any chest pain, we should check the radial pulse in both the arms simultaneously to see any pulse difference. If it is present, then there is a very high possibility of aortic dissection. And if we thrombolyze such a patient, thinking an ST elevation MI, then the patient will die, immediately die within an hour. On X-ray, we will have a widened mediastinum. So, aortic dissection is classified into type 1, 2 and 3 by DeBakey and type A and type B by Stanford. So, Stanford classification is more judicial because type A is involvement of the aortic root, type B is aortic root is spared. The management depends only on this factor, whether the aortic root is involved or not involved. Because in patients with uncomplicated aortic dissection confined to the descending thoracic aorta, that is sparing of the aortic root, it should be treated medically by beta blockers, and we have to decrease the blood pressure, that is it. So, the medical therapy, the goal is to decrease the blood pressure, the velocity of LV contraction, both of which will decrease the aortic shear stress and minimize the tendency to further dissection. Any acute ascending aortic dissection involving the aortic root should be treated surgically whenever possible, since these patients are at a high risk for life-threatening complications like AR, tamponade and MI. Now, coming to tension pneumothorax, it is a collection of air in the pleural space which causes collapse of the ipsilateral lung and then cardiovascular collapse as intrathoracic pressure increases. The risk factors are COPD, connective tissue disease, trauma, recent instrumentation, any positive pressure ventilation. There will be absent breath sounds unilaterally, hypotension, distended neck veins and tracheal deviation. So, it occurs when air can't get into the chest, when air can get into the chest but cannot get out. So, it collapses lung and puts pressure on the vessels and heart, leading to rapidly and dangerously low blood pressure. So, clinically we will have a sudden onset of shortness of breath, low BP, rapid heart rate, absent breath sound over the affected hemithorax. It can be seen in young as well as in old, and the treatment is immediate needle thoracostomy followed by chest tube insertion. So, again the X-ray findings showing tracheal deviation. On the right side we have got a pneumothorax, left side is the normal lung which is pushed away. Coming to cardiac tamponade. So, cardiac tamponade is again a medical emergency which can rapidly progress to circulatory shock and cardiac arrest. So, what is pericardial effusion? It is the buildup of the pericardial fluid slowly over time. It allows the pericardium to stretch out to accommodate bigger volumes of fluid without compromising the heart. So, a chronic pericardial effusion can have up to 3 liters or even more of pericardial fluid, but a rapidly progressive pericardial effusion, even 200 ml, can cause a tamponade. Symptoms will be chest pain, shortness of breath and compression of near structures will occur. So, there is a backstride in which we will have a low blood pressure, distension of the jugular veins and muffled heart sound. In the acute pericardial tamponade, again there will be sudden fluid accumulation. The pericardium cannot adjust because of the dramatic increase in the pressure inside the pericardial sac. The causes can be chest trauma, ruptured aorta or rupture of the ventricle after a heart attack. Again the backstride, distended JVP, muffled heart sound and low BP. So, in the ECG we can have sinus tachycardia, electrical alterance and low QRS voltage. This is a chest X-ray showing a hugely dilated heart because of tamponade because of massive pericardial effusion. On X-ray we cannot say tamponade, it is because of massive pericardial effusion. This is an echo picture of showing massive pericardial effusion. The treatment is simple pericardiocentesis via this is a xiphoid technique. Now, I would like to emphasize there is during my residency, I diagnosed a case of tamponade just on the clinical sense without echo. So, I would like to share that knowledge. The pulsus paradoxus was present. Just on touching the pulse, it was I was having skipped beats. So, initially I thought the patient is having any ectopics, but when I attached the monitor, all the QRSs were coming at a regular interval. So, ECG was normal, heart was beating regularly, but I was skipping beats on palpation. So, it meant that as the patient was breathing, as the patient was inspiring, the PP was falling so low that I was unable to appreciate the radial pulse. So, I said it is a case of pulsus alterans, it has to be tamponade, which came out to be true. So, I got a period of around 1 and 1.5 hours in which I shifted the patient to cath lab and we were able to do the pericardiocentesis. Otherwise, getting an echo sometimes is not very rapidly available and we may lose up the patient. So, if there is an absence of, if we are having any irregular pulse and on monitor we are seeing regular QRS complexes, then it has to be tamponade.
So other features भी होंगे जिधर वेरिएंट भी होगा prominent और right sided kabila होगा coiled hook.
Yes, it was there, but I basically wanted to emphasize on this point. Yes, sir. This muffled heart sound is many times not present because in cases of COPD we don't have proper heart sound. So again, that is not very relevant clinically. I would just like to emphasize, summarize all these points. Acute coronary syndrome, patient will have diaphoresis, tachypnea, tachycardia, hypotension, crackles in the lungs can be heard, LVS3 can be present, murmur of acute MR. Examination may be completely normal in an uncomplicated case. In case of pulmonary embolism, we will have tachycardia and dyspnea in more than 90% of patients and there can be painful inspiration. In aortic dissection, the risk factors like Marfan syndrome or any connective tissue disorder, bicuspid aortic valve can be there. There may be extremity pulse difference in up to 30% of patients. A severe pain, abrupt in onset with a pulse difference with a widened mediastinum on chest X-ray, there is a very high probability of dissection. Syncope can also be seen. In case of esophageal rupture, there will be MSS, subcutaneous emphysema, pneumothorax, unilateral decreased or absent breath sound may be present. Then for pericarditis, there may be fever, pleuritic chest pain. The pericarditis pain increases in supine position, decreases in leaning forward position, a friction rub can be present and the pain classically radiates to the base of the trapezius. So, the patient will complain of pain and at this point. In myocarditis, patient will have fever, chest pain and heart failure. In case of peptic ulcer disease, epigastric tenderness may be present. In case of gallbladder disease, Murphy sign will be seen. For pneumonia, we will have fever, localized chest pain, pleuritic type character, friction rub can be present. For pneumothorax, there will be absence of breath sound. Costochondritis is just a clinical diagnosis. On touching the patient, it will be tender. Herpes zoster, it will be dermatomal, it will be unilateral, and if the rash is present, then the diagnosis is very clear. Thank you. Quiz. What is the most common ECG finding in pulmonary embolism? So, S1, Q3, T3 is the most specific but present in only 37% of cases. The most common ECG finding is sinus tachycardia. So, I think the
This was a very tricky or very systematically organized. That can confuse.
What is the name of sign seen in echocardiography in pulmonary embolism? There is, so that is the criteria for the pre-likelihood possibility of pulmonary embolism before the diagnosis. Name of sign seen on echocardiography in pulmonary embolism. सर वर्बली बताया था, लिखा नहीं था उस पे. ऑप्शन डिक्रीज सर मैं कौन है साइन. So McGonagall sign is there will be RV dysfunction, but there is a relatively apical sparing.
इसको 2 कैटेगरीज देना चाहिए। DVT के मरीज हैं पुराने। Oh my God,
तब तो पूरा जानकार
तुमको भी नहीं मिलना चाहिए।
What is the minimum time for wire crossing in ST elevation MI?
less than 30 minutes,
90 minutes.
30
90 किसने बोला?
30
So
30
नहीं सर 90 है. So अगर if the patient is directly going to a PCI enabled center, it is 60 minutes, and if it is going to a non PCI enabled center and then being transferred, then it is 90 minutes. तो 30 आपका सर ये सही है कि 30 मिनट्स ट्रैवलिंग के लिए हम लोग अलाउ करते हैं, बट टाइम इज 90 मिनट्स. What is the ideal treatment in case of ST elevation MI? Medical management including fibrinolysis.
ये बोला पहले अश्विनी को सेकंड हो गया।
तो आंसर इज प्राइमरी एंजियोप्लास्टी. एक क्वेश्चन और है सर, मैं डालना भूल गया. What are the contraindications or relative contraindications of prasugrel? Prasugrel. In which patients we have to be cautious while giving prasugrel? Elderly patients. Low body weight. Prasugrel is just like clopidogrel is a P2Y12 inhibitor.
पेशेंट और एंटीकोगुलेंट्स पहले से बताओ।
नहीं सर, आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट अ पेशेंट ऑफ मायोकार्डियल इन्फेक्शन इन acute MI undergoing PCI. Normally we give aspirin and clopidogrel, but we have got alternatives to clopidogrel now. We can give prasugrel, we can give ticagrelor. So prasugrel should be given only in cases in which we are planning a angioplasty. Medical management में नहीं देना है सर. Only in patients we are planning angioplasty. उसमें भी it has got a very high bleeding risk. तो high bleeding risk के factors like elderly more than 75 years, low body weight like less than 60 kg, and third is any history of a stroke. Then we don't have to give prasugrel. We should give alternatives. And the best treatment that we have got nowadays is ticagrelor. Ideally, we should keep all the patients on ticagrelor, whether for a medical management or for an angioplasty. Thank you.
इसका सही आंसर
सर.
थैंक यू अभिषेक फॉर योर वंडरफुल प्रेजेंटेशन. एक चीज़ जो अभिषेक की मुझे सबसे ज़्यादा पसंद आई, हिज क्लिनिकल सेंस फॉर डायग्नोसिस ऑफ कार्डियक कंपोनेंट. मुझे याद है 70s में ग्रेजुएशन कर रहे थे, तो मेरा एक जूनियर हुआ करता था शायद यादव पदम सिंह, अश्विनी को शायद भंडारी. उसने पहले उस समय इतना ज़्यादा हम लोग के पास इन्वेस्टिगेशन नहीं हुआ करता. क्लिनिकली उसने कार्डियक कंपोनेंट डायग्नोस किया और उसको ट्रीट किया. और इसके लिए उस समय के हमारे जो प्रोफेसर हेड थे, उन्होंने वो इतना खुश होकर उन्होंने 1 रुपया दिया उसको इनाम, जो कि उस समय हम लोग के लिए 10 लाख के बराबर कि प्रोफेसर एंड हेड ने इतना अप्रिशिएट किया उस बात को. एंड दैट क्लिनिकल सेंस वाज प्रेजेंट व्हेन ही डायग्नोस्ड विदाउट द इको कार्डियक कंपोनेंट. तो आई गिव अ क्लैप.
Thank you, sir.
अब डिस्कशन में क्वेश्चन जो आप लोग हैं.
बहुत अच्छा, वेरी गुड प्रेजेंटेशन.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if you want to add something, sir.
मैं ये ऐड करना चाहूँगा कि कभी भी जैसे ECG आप देखते हैं और ECG में कभी डाउटफुल ST एलिवेशन रहता है, तो कभी भी चेस्ट पेन के साथ अगर डाउट आपको क्रिएट होता है कि ये ST एलिवेटेड है या नहीं है, जैसे कभी रेसिप्रोकल चेंजेस नहीं देखते हैं, तो नेवर ट्रॉम्बोलाइज द पेशेंट. Ask the patient to go for angio and primary angioplasty.
तो ड्रॉप आई से कंफर्म नहीं करेंगे.
उतना डिले करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं.
सर ट्रोपाई में इशू क्या है, पेन ऑनसेट के 6 घंटे बाद तो पॉजिटिव आएगा. तो अगर पेशेंट आपके पास 2 घंटा आया तो आप 4 घंटा MI को नहीं छोड़ सकते हैं विदाउट ट्रीटमेंट. सेकेंडली सर अनस्टेबल एंजाइना हो सकता है, ECG के वो चेंजेस पुराने हों, तो अनस्टेबल एंजाइना में इट इज़ बेटर इफ़ वी डू दी एंजियोप्लास्टी बिफोर हैंड. मेडिकली ज़्यादा कुछ करने को है नहीं. एंड वो अनस्टेबल एंजाइना में LV-EF इज़ नॉर्मल. फ्रैंक MI हो गया सर, EF डाउन हो जाएगा, लाइफ क्वालिटी बहुत ख़राब हो जाती है. सो एज अ कार्डियोलॉजिस्ट आर एम इज़ टू इम्प्रूव द क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ. सिर्फ मैनेज करके घर भेजना नहीं हमारा एम रहता है. इफ़ वी सेल्वेज द मायोकार्डियम क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ इज़ मच मच बेटर। नहीं तो लास्ट में फिर वो हार्ट फेलियर करके पूरी लाइफ उनकी बीत जाती है। एंड अगेन सर सडन कार्डियक डेथ का रिस्क रहता है, हार्ट का पंपिंग कम हुआ कभी भी मर सकते हैं।
सबसे एक चीज़ बताइए, तो नॉन STMI हो तो STMI हो, तो अगर सब में प्राइमरी एंजियोप्लास्टी करें तो क्या दिक्कत है? क्यों थ्रोम्बोसिस की बात हो रही थी अभी आपने जब कहा?
सर एक्चुअली हर जगह पर पे प्राइमरी PCI की फैसिलिटी अवेलेबल नहीं है वर्ल्ड वाइड, मतलब दी सर जहाँ पे अवेलेबल है वहाँ पे सर प्राइमरी PCI ही करते हैं हम लोग। एक ही रीज़न होता है कि या तो पेशेंट अनविलिंग है, ही इज़ नॉट अफोर्डेबल, या वो करने को तैयार नहीं है। तब एक बार सर BRD में स्टार्ट हो गया, कोई गरीब पेशेंट है उसको वहाँ भेजा जा सकता है। बट प्रैक्टिकली स्पीकिंग सर गवर्नमेंट सेटअप्स में प्राइमरी बहुत रेयर होता है, वो 24-48 आवर्स के बाद होता है, तब तक बहुत बेनिफिट नहीं मिलता है। आफ्टर 48 आवर्स तो करना भी नहीं चाहिए सर। आफ्टर 48 आवर्स आपको एंजियो करना है सब में। एंजियो का बेनिफिट ये है, डॉक्टर्स पूछते हैं कि क्यों करना है एंजियो, या पेशेंट ही पूछता है भाई अब तो ठीक है दवाई से भी हमको आराम है। रिस्क स्ट्रेटिफिकेशन हो जाता है। अगर डायबिटिक है और लेफ्ट मेन कोरोनरी आर्टरी या प्रॉक्सिमल LED इन्वॉल्व है, उसकी बाईपास होना ही होना चाहिए, बिकॉज वो पेशेंट कभी भी डेथ हो सकती है उस पेशेंट की, रेदर देन मेडिकल मैनेजमेंट पे केवल छोड़ दिया जाए। तो वो रिस्क स्ट्रेटिफिकेशन के बाद से सेकेंडली पेशेंट्स को मैं देखता हूँ सर 4-4 एंटी एंजाइनल्स चल रहे हैं, पेशेंट अपना एकदम मस्त है, एंजियो किया एक छोटा सा ब्लॉक है, तो एंटी एंजाइनल्स सर बंद हो जाएंगे। उसका जो कॉस्ट है, जो अगले 5 साल वो 4-4 दवाई खाएगा, निकोरान फ्लेविडॉन बहुत कॉस्टली आते हैं, वो सब मेडिसिन बंद हो जाएंगे, पेशेंट का कॉस्ट रिकवर हो जाएगा एंजियोग्राफी का। तो लॉन्ग टर्म के हिसाब से सोचें तो एंजियोग्राफी हैज़ टू बी डन इन ऑल द केसेस ऑफ MI। 10,000 10 से 11,000। तो सेंटर टू सेंटर डिपेंड कर रहा है, अराउंड 1,10,000 1 लाख तक है सर। गोरखपुर में सर सब सारी कर रहे हैं सर। Thank you, sir.
And now I would like to invite Dr. Challenger to give the certificate to the speaker for today.